Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we'll spend some time with the old words of China, with the kind of thoughts that move slowly, like water in a deep bowl or wind through bamboo. We'll listen to ideas from ancient philosophers, a few quiet lines, a few gentle images, and the kind of wisdom that has rested in books for a very long time. If you enjoy these calm journeys, you can feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment if you'd like, perhaps sharing where you're listening from tonight, or what kind of peaceful topic you might like to hear next. So settle in, let the room grow softer around you, and allow the night to become a little quieter. We'll begin with a small step into an older world, and simply follow it where it leads. There is something especially restful about ancient Chinese philosophy because it does not often rush towards certainty. It does not always sound like a command. More often, it sounds like a hand resting lightly on the table, as if to say, look here and think for a while. The words most people meet first are from Laozi, from Confucius, from Zhuangzi, and from the long, patient tradition that grew around them. These thinkers did not live in one simple moment. They belonged to changing times, crowded courts, wandering teachers, narrow roads, small houses, and the slow movement of ideas from one generation to the next. Their words survived because people kept returning to them, not because they were loud, but because they were durable. A short line from the Tao Te Ching can feel like a room with one lamp in it. The meaning does not flood the space. It appears softly, and then it remains. Laozi often speaks as though the best things are not the most forceful things. Water, for example, is gentle, but it shapes stone. The low place receives the stream. The quiet valley gathers the rain. These are not grand declarations. They are observations, and that makes them easier to carry into the night. Perhaps that is part of why these sayings settle so well before sleep. They do not insist that the listener become someone else by morning. They suggest that the world already contains balance if only we can notice it. A tree does not hurry its leaves. A river does not negotiate with every rock. And a mind sometimes does not need to solve everything before resting. Confucius offers another kind of calm. His teachings are less like mist on a hillside and more like a table prepared carefully, a bowl placed where it should be, a lamp kept steady through the evening. He cared about conduct, manners, learning, family, duty, and the daily habits that make a life feel ordered. Yet even there the tone is rarely harsh. It is attentive. It notices the small things. A well-placed phrase, a respectful pause, a meal shared with care, a student willing to return to the lesson again and again. These are not dramatic scenes, but they are the quiet architecture of a human life. Confucius seems to understand that a person is not built in one moment. A person is shaped slowly, by repetition, by correction, by remembering what matters. And then there is Zhuangzi, whose writings feel like a dream that knows it is a dream and smiles a little at the thought. He is playful, wandering, uncertain in a way that can be strangely comforting. He tells stories that bend at the edges, stories of butterflies, of giant fish, of men who think they know too much, and of the wide, strange freedom that comes when certainty loosens its grip. If Laozi is a deep river and Confucius is a carefully arranged room, Zhuangzi is an open field at dusk, with insects singing and no wall in sight. He reminds the listener that the world is larger than our plans. That perspective can be restful. We spend so much of life trying to hold everything in place. Zhuangzi gently suggests that some things are lighter when left alone. So tonight, we will wander slowly among these voices, not to master them, not to turn them into a lesson, but to sit beside them for a while, like someone resting at the edge of a courtyard after sunset. We'll move through small observations, short sayings, old examples, and the patient mood of a civilization that often found wisdom in restraint. And as the hours of the night deepen, perhaps the words will become less like explanations and more like a steady breathing rhythm, a measured pace, a way of letting the world become a little softer. In many ancient Chinese sayings, nature is not decoration, it is the teacher. A hillside, a stream, a seed, a cloud, these are not just pretty images. They are ways of understanding movement, change, and patience. One can spend a long time with the idea that water is yielding and yet stronger than stone. It flows around obstacles rather than always meeting them head-on. It finds the lower place, and in finding it, it gathers power. This is one of those ideas that feels useful at every hour, but especially at night when the mind may be tempted to hard edges and bright conclusions. Water does not force itself into being what it is not. It simply continues. There is comfort in that. To continue without strain, to move without noise. Another image appears often in the old texts, the image of a tree. The straight tree may be cut down for timber, while the crooked one stands longer because it is overlooked. That thought may seem practical, even a little wry, but it holds a quieter lesson too. Not everything that is useful is immediately admired. Not everything that lasts is elegant in the eyes of the world. Some things survive because they are not claimed so quickly. That is a bedtime thought if there ever was one. The mind can unclench around it. There is no need to make every part of ourselves fit a polished shape tonight. A crooked branch can still offer shade. A rough stone can still mark a path. A person can be incomplete in one season and still belong to the world. The old texts often return to the idea of balance, but not balance as a perfect, polished stillness. More often it is balance as adjustment. A bowl sits level because the table beneath it is level enough. A farmer watches the weather, the soil, the water, and the season. A ruler in ideal form should be attentive and restrained. A household should have order but not stiffness. A conversation should have respect but not emptiness. This kind of thought grows naturally from a society that was always aware of change. Ancient China was not one place frozen in one pattern. It was dynasties and borders, rituals and wars, scholars and farmers, city walls and open roads. Philosophers lived in a world that changed with the seasons and with the rise and fall of power. So their sayings often carry a practical softness. They are not abstract clouds. They are ways to move through weather. Think of a scholar in a quiet room reading by lamplight. The brush rests nearby. The paper is smooth. Outside there may be a court full of uncertainty, or a road where armies once passed, or simply the ordinary noise of a household settling down for the evening. The scholar's work is slow. Characters are written one at a time. A phrase is considered. A line is copied again. There is patience in the motion of the hand, and patience itself becomes a philosophy. To sit with a question without forcing it. To allow a thought to ripen. To understand that some truths are not found by chasing them. They arrive when the mind becomes still enough to notice them. Laozi would likely approve of that kind of stillness. He often speaks of the value of emptiness, of usefulness in what is not filled, of the room within a vessel that makes the vessel function. A cup is useful because it is hollow. A house is useful because it has rooms. A wheel turns because there is a space in its center. These are simple things, but they carry a deep, quiet surprise. What is empty is not nothing. It is available. That idea can be very gentle at bedtime. There is space in the mind. There is room for rest. Not every corner needs to be occupied by thought. A great deal of ancient Chinese philosophy seems to say, without raising its voice, that the world is already full of rhythms if we learn to listen. Day and night, growth and decline, speech and silence, action and waiting. A person who understands those rhythms is not necessarily powerful in the ordinary sense, but they may become steady, and steadiness is a kind of power that does not announce itself. So let the image of water remain for a moment. Let the tree remain. Let the hollow cup remain. These are small, ordinary things, and yet the old thinkers return to them again and again, because ordinary things can carry wisdom farther than grand declarations ever could. A bowl of water, a branch bending in the wind, a cup on a table, these are enough to remind us that gentleness is not weakness, and that the quiet way is often the enduring one. Confucius is often remembered for order, and that is true, but order in his world is not cold. It is human. It has the texture of a household where people know one another's names, where meals are shared, where elders are respected, where learning is repeated until it becomes part of the body. He is a thinker of relationships. This matters. His philosophy is not built around escaping the world, but around living well within it. There is a comforting kind of attention in that. It says that the ordinary structure of life matters, that kindness is not a small thing, that the way we answer one another shapes the room we all share. Imagine a modest courtyard at evening. The stones may still hold the day's warmth. A basin of water sits near the wall. A few steps lead to an inner room. There is the sound of a sleeve brushing against wood, a bowl being set down carefully, a voice lowered out of respect. These are not dramatic details, but they are the details from which a stable life can be made. Confucius valued learning, but he did not imagine it as a sudden flash. He pictured return, review, practice. A person reads, reflects, tries again, and becomes a little more fitted to the world each time. That is reassuring because it leaves room for imperfection. One does not need to be finished. One only needs to remain willing. There is a famous feeling in his teachings that can be paraphrased simply. Do not ask only what is useful to you today, ask what is right. That may sound severe at first, but in a calm evening setting it becomes softer. It suggests a life that is coherent, one where actions are not scattered everywhere like leaves. It suggests a person who can sleep without having to carry too much disorder into the dark. And then there is his attention to ritual. Ritual can sound distant to modern ears, but in Confucius it often means small repeated forms that make life more thoughtful. A greeting, a bow, the proper way to sit, speak, serve, or listen. In the old world, these forms were not empty if they were done with sincerity. They created a rhythm in the social fabric, like stitches holding cloth together. It is easy to overlook the comfort of ritual, yet many people know it without naming it. The same cup each night. The same lamp turned low. The same blanket folded over the chair. Small patterns help the mind understand that the day is ending safely. Confucius would perhaps understand that better than most. He would likely see that repetition is not boredom when it is attached to care. A parent repeating a lesson, a student repeating a line, a host arranging a seat, a friend returning to a promise. These things carry dignity because they show that attention has not wandered away. One of the more tender aspects of Confucian thought is that it never fully forgets the heart. It may speak of duty, but duty is not meant to be hollow. It should be joined to sincerity, to proper feeling, to a kind of inward uprightness. There is no value in a perfect gesture if the intention has gone missing. This too feels useful at night when many outer performances have finally fallen away. What remains is what is real. The moon above a courtyard does not need applause, it simply appears. In the same way, a person's best conduct may be quiet, almost invisible to others, but still steady enough to guide the day. A bowl washed carefully. A message answered kindly. A chair offered to someone older. A disagreement softened before it hardens. Such acts are small, but they are not small in consequence. So Confucius rests in the background of these hours, reminding us that a well-ordered life is not necessarily a busy one. It can be a clear one, clear enough to let the night in, clear enough to allow the body to rest without lingering confusion. And because bedtime is a time when things can be simplified, perhaps his philosophy becomes easier to hear. Be sincere, be attentive, keep learning, honor what is proper, care for the people around you. These are not demands shouted from far away. They are gentle instructions for living among others and maybe for settling alone with one's thoughts as well. If Confucius is the careful room, Zhuangzi is the open sky beyond it. His writing is among the most restful in the ancient world, perhaps because it refuses to pin the world down too tightly. He likes stories that slide sideways, stories where a man wakes uncertain whether he is himself, where a butterfly seems as real as a philosopher, where the largest and smallest things can exchange places if we look from another angle. There is a strange comfort in that looseness. The mind, especially at night, can become over-attached to one interpretation, one worry, one fixed shape of events. Zhuangzi gently releases the grip. He suggests that certainty is not always wisdom, and that perspective matters more than pride. A story about a dream can sit beside the pillow without demanding too much. Was it a man dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of a man? The point is not to solve the puzzle so much as to feel the ground shift a little under the feet and notice that the self is not as rigid as it seems. For the sleepless mind, this can be a gift. If identity is a little more fluid, perhaps the worries attached to it can soften too. Zhuangzi often celebrates the usefulness of what seems useless. A twisted tree is spared by the woodcutter because no one wants its timber. A vessel with no practical shape survives because it does not tempt the axe. A person who does not fit every ordinary measure may live longer, wander farther, or remain freer than expected. These are playful reversals, but they are also an invitation to breathe. Not every value is visible at first glance. Not every successful life is neatly carved. Some things survive precisely because they are not overused. Some people remain intact because they do not conform too completely to what the world wants from them. This is a pleasant thought to carry into the dark. Tonight, you do not have to be especially useful. You do not have to arrange yourself into a perfect shape. The crooked branch still holds birds. The loose stone still has a place in the wall. The wandering stream still reaches the sea. Zhuangzi also seems to understand that language itself has limits. Words can point, but they cannot hold the whole of life, and that humility is useful. When the sentence ends, reality remains larger. When the explanation stops, the wind is still moving through the reeds. When the book is closed, the night continues. He was not writing from a place of anxiety. Even when his stories question the world, they rarely feel frightened by it. They feel curious. Curiosity is gentler than control. It asks, what if this thing is larger than I thought, or smaller, or stranger, or simply seen from the wrong angle? That curiosity can be very restful because it loosens the pressure to know everything now. It allows mystery to remain, not as a threat, but as a companion. The listener can drift with it. A fish beneath the surface, a cloud changing shape, a traveler pausing at a crossroads, a man laughing at his own certainty, all of these belong to Zhuangzi's world. There is even a tenderness in his humor. He does not mock people for being confused. He appears to know that confusion is part of being alive. He simply invites us not to cling too tightly to it. Let it pass like weather. Let the mind, like a paper lantern, keep enough light to move by, but not so much that it turns the whole room harsh. At night, this can feel almost like permission to be unsure, permission to let the boundaries of thought blur a little, permission to rest without finishing the argument. And so Zhuangzi moves beside the bed like a stream in the dark, making no demand. He does not ask for a conclusion. He offers only a wider field, a less crowded sky, and the possibility that the soul, if it is quiet enough, may resemble a butterfly for a while, light enough to settle wherever it is needed. The ancient texts did not travel by themselves. They were carried, copied, memorized, discussed, taught aloud, and sometimes recited by people who knew that a line could outlive a lifetime. That gives them a certain warmth. They are not polished stones dropped from a distance. They are living words passed from hand to hand. A teacher speaks, a student listens, another student writes, a family remembers, a court scholar argues, a monk preserves, a traveler carries a fragment into another place. In this way, philosophy becomes a kind of road, and the road itself becomes part of the philosophy. There is something reassuring about the slowness of that process. In a modern world of immediate exchange, it is easy to forget how long it once took for a thought to move. Ink had to dry, silk had to be stretched, bamboo strips had to be tied, paper had to be made and protected. A book was not only information, it was labor, care, and survival. So when we hear a sentence from the Tao Te Ching or the Analects, we are hearing not just the voice of one thinker, but the echo of many careful hands. The page has a history. The line has a journey. Ancient China itself was vast, and the lives within it were varied. A court in one place could be very different from a rural village in another. A scholar's study, a farmer's field, a market road, a monastery, a family shrine, a river crossing, all of these had their own rhythms. Philosophy did not hover above those rhythms in a clean, separate cloud. It was woven into them. That is one reason these ideas remain so approachable. They speak in terms of daily life. Food, work, conduct, seasons, family, speech, restraint, harmony, the proper place of each thing. The world is not divided into grand theories and ordinary life. The two are already touching. At night, that feels almost like a kindness. You do not need to leave the room in order to meet wisdom. It is already here in the arrangement of your own small space. The pillow, the glass of water, the dim wall, the slower breath, the softened edge of thought. The old philosophers would likely recognize these things as part of the same world they were describing. And perhaps this is why their sayings remain so widely loved. They do not expire quickly. A person can encounter them as a child, as a student, as a worker, as an elder, and find something different each time. At one age, the line about patience matters most. At another, the line about humility. Later, the line about emptiness or duty, or the ease of not forcing what cannot be forced. Some words become more useful as life becomes more complex. Others become gentler as the years pass. The old texts are patient with this. They do not rush the listener. They wait. That waiting has a nighttime quality. The sky waits for dawn. The room waits for morning. The mind, if it is wise, can wait too. It does not need to solve every question before sleep. It can leave some things unfinished and trust that unfinished things are not always broken things. A river is unfinished as it flows. A season is unfinished until it changes. A person perhaps is unfinished until the end, and even then, remembered by others, the story continues in another form. This long continuity, from teacher to student, from line to line, from dynasty to dynasty, makes the old wisdom feel very quiet and very large at the same time. It is like looking at a mountain from a distance. The shape remains steady, but the light keeps changing. One side is lit, another side is shadowed, and the whole thing looks different as evening deepens. So let the road remain for a moment. The road of the manuscript, the road of the traveler, the road of thought. It is long, but it is calm. And while the road extends, there is no need to hurry along it. We can simply rest beside it, listening to the old voices as they pass. Many of the most loved lines in ancient Chinese philosophy are brief enough to sit in the palm of the hand. They do not need a large stage. They survive precisely because they are small and clear and able to be remembered when the lamp is low. A line about doing without striving. A line about the soft overcoming the hard. A line about the noble person learning from each day. A line about returning again and again to what is proper. These are not fireworks. They are pebbles dropped into a still pond, making circles that widen quietly. A bedtime listener may find that small lines are easier to hold than large ones. The mind is already tired, or at least ready to become quieter. It does not need to chase an argument across a long page. It needs a stone path, a few lanterns, one slow turn after another. That is why aphorisms can be such a restful form. They do not exhaust themselves. They offer just enough and then stop. They allow the reader to add meaning slowly. A person returns to them on one evening and then again months later, and the words seem to have changed, when perhaps it is the listener who has changed. One of the gentlest teachings across the tradition is the suggestion that forcing is often wasteful. Push too hard and the hand grows tense. Press too firmly and the fabric tears. Try to command the sea and you only grow wet. Better perhaps to align oneself with the grain of things, to move in step with what is already unfolding. This idea is not passive, it is attentive, it asks for discernment. When should one act? When should one wait? When should one speak, and when should one let the silence do some of the work? These are not easy questions, but they are peaceful questions because they belong to the living rhythm of an actual day. A person sitting by a window at night might recognize them at once. There is a small noise outside. The room shifts in temperature. A thought comes and then goes. Should one hold it or let it pass? Should one answer or remain still? Not every moment needs a decision. Sometimes awareness is enough. The old philosophers were interested in the art of living well, but living well was never abstract. It meant knowing how to carry oneself, how to be with others, how to keep the inner life from becoming too hard or too scattered. There is a deep practicality in that. Practicality, when it is humane, becomes almost a form of tenderness. That tenderness is easy to miss because the language is often so spare. But spareness can be a kindness. It leaves room for the listener. It does not crowd the room with too many decorations. The message arrives, and the silence around it matters too. Consider how a single short saying can alter the mood of an entire evening. A phrase about softness can make a difficult hour feel less sharp. A phrase about humility can relieve the pressure to perform. A phrase about returning to the center can quiet a wandering mind. These are small effects, but at bedtime, small effects are often the most welcome. And so the sayings continue, not as instructions carved into stone with harsh edges, but as hand-sized reminders. Be simple, be steady, be aware. Do not overreach, make room. Let the world be larger than your own urgency. There is no need to chase these ideas. They are already here, waiting at a comfortable distance. If you listen, they seem to settle the air around them. If you close your eyes, they become almost like a slow rhythm in the background, a measured pulse that helps the night find its depth. In that way, ancient Chinese philosophy can feel less like a distant subject and more like an atmosphere, a way of breathing, a way of turning down the brightness inside the mind, a way of letting the simple and enduring things remain visible while the rest grows dim. If you imagine the world of these thinkers, you may picture a river bending through the landscape, carrying boats, reflections, and the slow logic of water. You may picture city walls, market streets, gardens, study rooms, and roads stretching outward into the provinces. You may picture a time when travel was deliberate, when a journey required planning, patience, and attention to weather. In such a world, waiting was not always wasted time. Waiting was part of living. A messenger waits. A farmer waits for rain. A scholar waits for a student to understand. A family waits for news. A ruler ideally waits before acting too quickly. The seasons themselves wait and change in their own order. This makes ancient Chinese philosophy unusually suited to slow listening. It remembers that life is not always a straight line. It bends, it pauses, it repeats. There is a kind of wisdom in accepting that, not resignation but rhythm. The mind becomes less distressed when it stops expecting every answer immediately. A tree does not insist that spring arrive before spring is ready. A river does not criticize the mountain for taking time to erode. Change in the old texts is not an emergency. It is a fact of existence. The city and the countryside both appear in the background of the tradition. The city has its rituals, its officials, its schools, its archives. The countryside has its fields, its labor, its simpler measures of time. The philosophers move between these worlds, observing each without forgetting the other. That movement is important. It keeps the thinking grounded. Sometimes wisdom comes from the court, and sometimes from the edge of the road. Sometimes from an elder's statement. Sometimes from a farmer's patience. Sometimes from a hermit who has chosen the mountain not because the mountain is romantic, but because the noise of the world has become too distracting. That image of the hermit is especially calm. A figure in a distant valley, perhaps near pine trees, perhaps near a stream, with a few simple objects and a mind that has stopped trying to own the world. In stories like that, retreat is not failure. It is a form of attention. To step back can be a way of seeing clearly. Zhuangzi would probably smile at the irony that sometimes the most spacious life is the one with the fewest claims. Laozi might note that the less forced the hand, the more naturally things arrange themselves. Confucius might remind us that even in retreat, one should not lose the shape of one's humanity. 3 voices, 3 tones, each helpful in its own quiet way. And all around them the world continues. Boats cross water. Bells sound at a distance. Paper is folded, tea is poured, someone studies by a window, someone writes a letter, someone walks home in the blue hour between daylight and dark. These are not famous moments, but they are the kind from which a civilization is built. Night falls differently over a city than over a field, but in both places the same easing happens. Sound thins, shadows lengthen, faces grow less distinct. In that dimmer space, old thoughts can return with special clarity. The sentence about softness, the sentence about order, the sentence about not forcing what cannot be forced. There is a dignity in that return. It suggests that wisdom is not only for bright mornings or public debate. It is also for the hour when the world is almost still, and the listener is free to let the mind drift through it without hurry. So if you find yourself thinking of rivers tonight, or courtyards, or roads lined with trees, or a small study where a brush is resting beside the ink stone, you are very close to the feeling these philosophers often evoke. A place where motion and stillness are not enemies. A place where the river keeps moving and the shore remains. A place where one can listen without needing to answer. Among the most enduring ideas in the old Chinese texts is the sense that forcing the world often makes it harder to live in. This appears in many forms. A ruler should not be overbearing. A speaker should not dominate. A person should not strain against every limit as if the world were a locked door waiting to be broken. There is a softer path, though it is not always the most obvious one. It involves timing, restraint, and the willingness to allow processes to unfold. In daily life, this might mean listening before answering. It might mean resting before exhaustion becomes severe. It might mean noticing when a task should be done and when it should be left alone for a little while. These are not dramatic acts, but they are acts of intelligence. The old philosophers often admired what was effective without shouting about itself. The best way is sometimes the least noisy way. The strongest branch is often the one that bends. The most useful person may be the one who knows when to step aside. That can be a comforting thought if the day has been full of effort. Not everything is solved by pushing. Some things soften only when pressure is removed. A knot can be untied more easily with patience than with force. A room can be made habitable not by filling it, but by leaving space within it. A difficult feeling may begin to loosen if it is simply observed, rather than immediately fought. In the language of the Tao, this is not defeat, it is alignment. In the language of Confucius, it may look like proper measure. In the language of Zhuangzi, it may look like freedom from unnecessary strain. Different voices, yet a shared tenderness toward the human condition. One can imagine a quiet craftsman shaping wood with care, not by striking wildly, but by knowing the grain. One can imagine a calligrapher pressing the brush just enough, then lifting it, then letting the line breathe. One can imagine a gardener watering the roots, not the leaves. These are small images, but they contain the principle beautifully. Work with what is there. The same principle applies to thought. If the mind is tangled tonight, perhaps it does not need a battle. Perhaps it needs a slower question. Perhaps it needs fewer conclusions. Perhaps it needs to sit in the shade and let the inner weather pass. That is one reason these teachings still feel modern without trying to be modern. They do not assume that more force is always better. They understand fatigue. They understand the burden of trying to control too much. They understand that a person can become exhausted by resistance, and that relief can begin with a simple change in posture. Even the act of breathing can reflect this. Inhale and do not grasp. Exhale and release a little more than before. The body already knows some of this. The old thinkers merely give it language. And because this is a bedtime journey, the value of not forcing may be the most immediate wisdom of all. You do not have to hold the entire night together. You do not have to make sleep happen by effort. You can create room for it and then let it arrive in its own way. Perhaps that is the quietest teaching here. Make room, trust the process. Let the valley receive the water. Let the bowl remain empty enough to be useful. Let the branch bend without breaking. Let the mind grow less insistent. In that still, open space, the old words begin to feel less like philosophy and more like a way of being held, gently and without pressure. A single saying can outlast an empire. That is one of the more astonishing things about the old wisdom traditions. Palaces crumble, borders shift, dynasties fade, yet a sentence written long ago can still be spoken softly in another room, by another voice in another century. This longevity gives the sayings a particular dignity. They have been tested by time. Not every phrase survives. Only the ones that continue to make sense when circumstances change, the ones that can be heard by different generations and still feel alive. That does not mean they are always interpreted the same way. In fact, the opposite is true. A line about water may mean one thing to a ruler, another to a monk, another to a tired parent, another to a student, another to someone lying awake in the dark. The words remain the same, but their reflections shift. That shifting is part of the beauty. It makes the tradition feel alive rather than fixed. We are not reading dead artifacts. We are meeting ideas that still move like light on a river at dusk. The surface is changing, but the river remains. In ancient China, memory was carried through schools, families, official archives, and oral repetition. To remember correctly mattered. A misplaced character could alter a sense. A misheard line could drift over time. And yet drift is not always a loss. Sometimes it is how a teaching enters new life. Confucian texts became guides for education and governance. Taoist writing inspired reflection, withdrawal, simplicity, and balance. Zhuangzi offered imaginative freedom. Later readers found religious, ethical, political, and personal meanings in the same old words. In that way, the tradition expanded like a fan opening slowly. It is pleasant to imagine a manuscript rolling open on a wooden table. The characters are compact and elegant. The ink has a dark depth to it. The page is not merely seen but considered. Someone traces a line with the eyes and pauses at the end of it. That pause is part of the reading. Not everything needs to be consumed quickly. Modern life often trains us to move fast past what is quiet, but a saying from antiquity rewards a slower pace. It asks to be revisited. Its meaning may change depending on the hour. In the morning it might be practical. In the afternoon philosophical. At night nearly medicinal. There is a line of thought in the tradition that suggests the highest form of skill becomes almost invisible. The best action feels effortless because it is so well aligned with the situation. The best leader need not announce their leadership. The best speech need not shout. The best wisdom may feel simple only after years of returning to it. That simplicity is deceptive and comforting. A short sentence may be able to accompany a person through entire decades. It does not wear out the way excitement does. It does not need novelty every minute. It remains like a small light left on in a corridor. So the old sayings continue to do their quiet work. They remind us that memory is not only about the past. It is also about continuity, about keeping company with voices that have already learned something from living. To listen to them at night is to join a very old conversation, one that has no hurry and no need to end abruptly. The room grows softer, the page grows dimmer, the words themselves seem to lower their volume, and in that low light their long memory becomes less like history and more like a resting place. There is a lovely modesty in much of ancient Chinese philosophy. It does not always try to illuminate everything at once. Instead, it gives a little light and leaves some things in shadow. That approach is perhaps more humane than it first appears. Total brightness can be tiring. Not every corner needs to be exposed. Not every question must be answered on the same evening. A certain amount of mystery is natural and even useful. It allows the listener to remain open. Laozi often seems to prefer this gentler illumination. He does not pin the world down into a rigid diagram. He suggests that the deepest patterns are felt more than declared. The way of the world cannot be fully possessed. It can be followed or honored or moved with, but not locked into a box. That can be a relaxing idea. The world remains larger than any single explanation. Confucius, too, in a different way, may prefer light over noise. He values clarity but not clamor. A clear mind is not necessarily a loud one. A good teacher does not need to overpower the room. A measured phrase can travel farther than a shout. Zhuangzi, of course, becomes even more comfortable in partial light because his stories thrive in the space where categories blur. He does not mind if the edges are uncertain. In fact, he often seems to prefer them that way. He leaves enough room for surprise. This shared humility before the world is part of what makes the tradition feel so calm. It does not insist that reality be simplified beyond recognition. It allows complexity to remain, but handles it softly. Perhaps that is why so many of the classic metaphors are natural ones. Water, wind, bamboo, the moon, the valley, the seed. These things do not argue with one another. They simply exist in relation. They teach without pressure. Think of bamboo bending in a wind. It is not broken by the movement that would snap harder wood. Think of a moon reflected in water. The reflection is delicate and it changes with every ripple, yet it remains recognizable. Think of a seed in dark soil. Nothing appears to be happening, and yet something is gathering itself for later. Such images are full of bedtime usefulness. The body, too, knows that darkness is not empty. It is a place where processes continue quietly. Sleep often comes the same way, not by insistence but by surrender to a gentler rhythm. There is also a great deal of comfort in the sense that a few wise words may be enough. We do not always need a complete theory to feel steadier. Sometimes one sentence about yielding, or one line about sincerity, or one image of the empty cup is enough to rearrange the mood of a whole evening. And when the noise of the day has finally thinned, these gentle teachings can be heard more clearly. The world is still there but less sharp. The mind still moves but less urgently. The listener becomes more receptive to what is small and simple and durable. A little more light, a little less noise. That might be a useful summary of the entire mood. Not perfect revelation, not complete silence, but enough illumination to feel safe and enough quiet to let the heart settle. The night, after all, is not a problem to solve. It is a condition to enter, and ancient wisdom in its softest form helps us enter it without resistance. Imagine a study at dusk. The brush has been set aside. The inkstone is dark and still. A scroll lies partly open on the table, its characters small and patient. A window catches the last of the evening light. Beyond it, the world is turning toward night. This room, in some form, belongs to the old traditions of learning. It could be the room of a scholar preparing a lesson, or a student copying passages, or a traveler stopping for the evening with a book in hand. It could be anywhere that thought is given room to breathe. The study is not grand, and perhaps that is why it feels so comfortable. There are no unnecessary objects fighting for attention. There is just enough space for reading, just enough silence for reflection. A bowl of water, perhaps a wooden chair, a shelf with more texts, a cloth draped over one corner of the table. The light is soft. The day is nearly done. In such a room, ancient philosophy is not an abstract subject. It is almost a companion. The old lines remain available. One may turn to a saying about harmony, or a caution against excess, or a note about the usefulness of emptiness. Each phrase becomes a small lamp in the mind. The study also reminds us that these ideas were worked through by real people in real settings. Scholars across the centuries copied, compared, and argued over the classics. Some were official interpreters, some were monks, some were independent thinkers, some were students preparing for examinations, some were simply people who loved the weight of the words and the clarity they brought. There is something tender in that human chain. A young person studies a line, struggles with it, returns to it later in life, and then perhaps teaches it to someone else. A grandparent quotes a phrase at supper. A teacher writes it on a board. A reader in another century recognizes themselves in it. The room grows larger than its walls, and the study at dusk becomes symbolic of the whole tradition. The light is not harsh. The mind is not pressured. The words are there, but they do not demand performance. They encourage presence. That may be one of the most restful gifts of the old texts. They make room for thought without requiring a spectacle of thought. You can be quiet and still be engaged. You can be tired and still be receptive. You can listen at the edge of sleep and still receive something of value. Outside the window, night deepens. A bird settles. A distant sound passes and then is gone. The paper on the desk seems almost to hold the day's last warmth. In the softening light, even the act of reading turns into a kind of resting. And perhaps this is where the philosophy feels most intimate, not in the grand court, not in the debate hall, but in the dim study at the end of day, where a person sits with an old line and lets it do what it has always done, which is to make the world a little more livable, and the mind a little less crowded. The moon appears often in Chinese poetry and thought, and it belongs naturally to quiet reflection. It is not a harsh light. It does not interrupt the night. It simply gives shape to what is already there. That is a fitting image for philosophy that prefers subtlety. The moon does not explain the landscape. It reveals enough of it to let us continue. It draws a pale line across roofs, water, fields, and stone. It touches a courtyard wall. It rests on the surface of a bowl. It leaves the rest in softness. One can imagine old thinkers looking up at that same moon and recognizing in it the larger rhythm of things. The moon waxes and wanes. It changes, but not by panic. It returns. It teaches continuity through variation. It is never quite the same, and yet it remains itself. That makes it a perfect companion for a philosophy of change. Change need not mean disorder. It can mean movement within a pattern. The seasons do this. Rivers do this. Human lives do this. We are not fixed objects, but we are not lost entirely either. We recur in some way like the moon. The quiet power of that image is hard to overstate. In bedtime listening, the mind can rest on it easily. A moonlit path, a reflective pond, a wall washed in silver, all of these seem to ask for less from us. They invite observation, not argument. And observation is a deeply philosophical act in the old Chinese traditions. To notice the world faithfully before trying to dominate it is already a kind of wisdom. The sage, in one sense, is simply the one who has learned to see without excess. That may sound modest, but modesty here is not weakness. It is accuracy. It is the refusal to claim more certainty than the world can support. It is the willingness to stay near the real texture of things. A branch is a branch. Water is water. A person is more complex than a title. A day ends. Another begins. The moon above all this seems to approve, or at least to continue its own quiet work. It does not hurry the dark away, it shares it. Ancient Chinese philosophy often shares in the same way. It does not banish uncertainty, but makes it livable. It does not forbid sorrow, but places it in a wider season. It does not erase effort, but keeps effort from becoming frantic. So if the listener tonight imagines a moonlit garden, or a river turned pale by reflection, or a roofline silvered in the dark, that is enough. The image itself is part of the teaching. The world can be looked at gently. The mind can do the same. And as the hour grows later, the moonlight quality of the tradition becomes clearer. Not bright in the overwhelming sense, bright in the soft sense. Enough light to guide, enough shadow to rest. That balance perhaps is one of the oldest comforts in the world, and one of the most lasting. To return is a simple action, and in these teachings it is also a profound one. Return to the center, return to the proper measure, return to the quieter self, return to what is basic, what is honest, what is not inflated by appetite or noise. Return to the Tao, return to learning, return to the practice that was almost lost. Return to the thought that has been waiting patiently at the edge of memory. This idea of return feels especially kind at night. The day may have scattered attention in many directions. Conversations, tasks, messages, demands, all of them leave traces. Night invites the traces to gather again. The return is not a collapse. It is a coming home. A good philosophy of return does not shame the traveler for wandering. It simply recognizes that wandering and returning belong to the same life. Zhuangzi's drifters, Confucius's students, Laozi's seekers, they all move in different ways, but they often circle back toward a simpler awareness. There is no need to dramatize that movement. It is enough to imagine a path through fields, a familiar gate, a house lit from within. The traveler comes back, dusty perhaps, thoughtful perhaps, and the ordinary room receives them. The room has not changed very much. That is part of its grace. One might say the same of these old words. They receive us again and again without complaint. We can leave them for a while and come back. They will be there ready to sound slightly different because we are slightly different. This is one reason why rereading can be so peaceful. Rereading is return. It is a recognition that understanding is not linear. A sentence that seemed simple before may become rich later. A phrase that seemed difficult may suddenly clarify. The mind returns to the same line as to a familiar landscape seen in different weather. That kind of repetition is soothing. It removes the pressure of novelty. Not every encounter must be brand new. Some of the best encounters are the ones that deepen through familiarity. Ancient Chinese philosophy in this way rewards patience. It asks the reader not to seize meaning but to cultivate it, like a garden, like a field, like a friendship, like a room kept clean over time rather than all at once. And when the room is quiet enough, the mind begins to understand that return is not failure. It is maintenance of the soul, a return to simplicity, a return to breathing, a return to the softer boundaries of one's own life. That may be enough for tonight. No need for strain, no need for a final answer. Just the gentle motion of coming back to what is stable and allowing it to hold you for a while. The old philosophers would perhaps call that wisdom. The sleeping body might call it relief. The night in its patient way calls it enough, and so we stay a little longer with these calm voices from ancient China and let them fade the edges of the evening down to something softer. Water continues to flow. The bowl remains useful because it is open. The tree stands because it does not struggle against its own shape. The courtyard keeps its quiet. The scholar's lamp grows dim. The moon carries on above the rooftops. And the old sayings, brief and patient, rest where they have always rested, ready for whoever needs them. There is no need to gather everything up neatly now. The night can hold what is left. The mind can loosen its grip. Thought can become slower, simpler, and more willing to drift. If sleep is near, let it come in its own way. If you are still listening, let the words remain as a gentle background, like distant water or a breeze through bamboo. Either way, the room is quieter now than it was before, so rest well and let the old wisdom keep watch for a while. The evening is long, the path is calm, and there is nothing urgent waiting here. The quiet that follows does not need to be filled. It can remain open like a courtyard after rain, when every stone has been washed clean and the air seems to remember the sky. Ancient Chinese philosophy often returns to this kind of spaciousness. Not an empty spaciousness, but one that can receive. A cup is useful because it is hollow. A house is livable because it has rooms. A life becomes gentler when it leaves a little space between one thought and the next. This is an idea that appears in many forms across the old texts. The Tao Te Ching, brief and elusive, keeps pointing toward what is low, soft, hidden, and unforced. It praises the valley rather than the summit, the root rather than the branch, the yielding stream rather than the rigid wall. It suggests that what seems least impressive may endure the longest. In the stillness of night, that suggestion feels especially tender. The world is often drawn toward what is visible and loud during the day. Night remembers another order. It remembers that darkness is not always lack, that silence is not always absence, that the slow and the hidden may have their own kind of strength. Imagine for a moment an old valley settlement along a river in the period of the Warring States, when many kingdoms existed and many philosophers traveled from court to court with their advice. The roads were dustier then, the lamps smaller, the journeys longer, yet the same sky would have spread over them at dusk. The same stars, the same patient moon. Men who wrote about virtue, ritual, harmony, and the way still had to eat simple meals, wait for dawn, and listen to crickets in the grass. There is something quietly moving about that. These were not voices born in a dream. They came from lived-in seasons, from political uncertainty, from family duty, from the ordinary weight of being human. Their thoughts are large, but they are grounded in the common things of life. Confucius, as later remembered, is often imagined in motion, walking with disciples, speaking while the road unfurled beneath them. His teachings about ritual and proper conduct may sound formal at first, yet beneath them is a deep concern for how people live together without tearing one another apart. He was interested in the ordinary furniture of civilization: a respectful bow, a well-ordered household, a son caring for a parent, a ruler carrying responsibility with dignity. These are not dramatic images, they are the small hinges on which a whole society turns. At bedtime, this practical kindness can feel very peaceful. So much of anxiety comes from the sense that life must be solved all at once. But the ancient teachers often looked instead at steady habits. What is repeated with care becomes character. What is practiced with sincerity becomes ease. Order is not always a grand design. Sometimes it is only the daily returning of attention to what matters. There is a soft comfort in that. Tomorrow does not need to be mastered tonight. It only needs a place to begin. Zhuangzi, by contrast, often seems to smile at the very idea of mastery. His writings drift into parable, humor, and dream. He asks what it means to be certain, what it means to be useful, what it means to become trapped inside one's own categories. One famous image tells of a man dreaming he is a butterfly, then waking and wondering whether he is a man who dreamed of being a butterfly or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. It is a question that opens outward rather than closing in. At night, when the line between waking and dreaming grows thin, this old question has a special gentleness. The boundaries of the day soften. The mind loosens from its exact outlines. A thought can become a cloud. A memory can become a lantern seen across water. Sleep itself begins as a kind of philosophical uncertainty, a surrender of fixed position. And perhaps that is why Zhuangzi feels like a companion to the night. He does not insist that life must be arranged into hard shapes. He notices that birds fly, fish swim, trees spread, and each thing follows its own nature. He notices that what seems useless may have room to live precisely because it is not pressed into service. A crooked tree survives because no one can cut it down for lumber. An odd life may remain free because it is not measured too quickly. There is a strange peace in being allowed not to be efficient for one moment. Not every part of existence has to justify itself. Some things are worth keeping simply because they are alive. The old texts also remember the body with quiet respect, not as an enemy, not as a machine, but as part of the larger harmony of living. Breath, posture, food, rest, seasons, all of these appear in the background of ancient thought like the low music of a room. Health is not always presented as triumph. Sometimes it is balance, sometimes it is moderation, sometimes it is knowing when to stop. A night such as this invites that same wisdom. The body knows more than the mind often admits. It knows the difference between strain and release. It knows that eyes close best when they are not forced. It knows that the chest loosens when the day's grip weakens. It knows that sleep cannot be commanded, only welcomed. The ancient thinkers understood in their own ways that forcing often produces its own resistance. Water is not weak simply because it is soft. It shapes stone over time. It finds every opening. It goes around what cannot be moved. This is one of the oldest and quietest lessons in the world, and it reaches far beyond philosophy. Rivers have taught it to riverbanks. Rain has taught it to fields. Time has taught it to empires. Many vanished cities could have learned from water if they had listened longer. The walls of old kingdoms rise in imagination like silhouettes at dusk. Some were built with confidence that they would last forever, yet even the grandest palaces become ruins. Even the most polished tiles crack. Archaeology has shown us how many human certainties are temporary. Foundations are found beneath fields. Bronze bells sleep underground. Roads vanish under roots and grasses. Entire capitals become names in books. The ancient Chinese world holds many such layers. The Shang oracle bones, carved with questions and heated until they cracked, still carry the intimacy of people asking the future what it intended to do. Will it rain? Will the harvest be good? Will the king be safe? These are not abstract questions. They are the questions of people under a sky they could not control. The cracks in the bone became answers, or at least interpretations, and from them we can glimpse a civilization where uncertainty was already part of daily life. There is a hush in that. Across thousands of years, a human hand still reaches toward the unknown. In the later Zhou period, when many schools of thought emerged, philosophers attempted to respond to the instability of their age. The world was changing. States competed, customs shifted, old forms seemed fragile. Out of that pressure came reflection. Confucians turned toward order and virtue, Taoists toward spontaneity and the way, Mohists toward universal care and practical benefit, legalists toward law and state power. Each school saw something real, though they emphasized different truths. It is quieting to remember that philosophy often grows where certainty has weakened, not in perfect calm, but in the need to live wisely amid change. The old thinkers were not floating above history. They were inside it, and their words carry the traces of that struggle. Still, their writings rarely sound frantic when we meet them now. Time has polished their edges. What remains is often the distilled form of a thought, brief enough to fit in the hand. The superior person is not a vessel. To know harmony is to know the constant. He who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened. These sayings, whether exactly attributed or later gathered in tradition, have become part of the long conversation of Chinese wisdom. They are small enough for memory, yet large enough to open a whole evening of thought. The very brevity of a saying can be restful. A long argument asks for effort. A short line can simply remain with you. It may drift in and out of attention like a lantern moving behind paper walls. And there is something especially soothing about philosophy that includes humility. The old texts repeatedly warn against overreaching. They caution against cleverness that turns into pride. They praise the person who can remain centered without display. They suggest that the deepest truths may not be shouted. This is a lesson that suits the dark hour well. Night itself does not advertise. It simply arrives, lowers the light, and lets everything become less certain and more intimate. If one wandered through an ancient Chinese garden at dusk, one might see how carefully uncertainty was sometimes designed into space. Paths would curve rather than rush forward. Rocks would suggest mountains in miniature. Pavilions would appear and disappear among branches. Water might reflect a bridge so perfectly that one hesitated to know what was above and what was below. Such gardens were not made to overwhelm. They were made to invite wandering thought. They are small worlds of balance where the mind can slow down and notice how beauty often depends on restraint. This kind of beauty is found in the philosophy too. A thought is left incomplete so that the reader can enter it. A poem names a river, a moon, a bird returning home, and then allows the silence after the image to do part of the work. Classical Chinese poetry often moves this way, with a spare line that suggests a whole landscape. The unsaid matters as much as the said. One can imagine a scholar alone in a study, the lacquered desk cool beneath the hand, a brush resting beside ink, bamboo slips stacked nearby, or later, bound pages held carefully as if they were vessels of breath. Outside, a winter wind moves through the branches. Inside, a small brazier glows. The scholar reads a passage again. It is not that the passage changes. It is that the reader changes enough to hear another shade in it. The repetition is not redundancy. It is deepening. This is also how memory works when it is gentle. It does not demand full possession. It allows things to return in fragments, a phrase from childhood, a face seen long ago, the smell of paper in a library, the sound of a far-off bell. The mind revisits these places as if walking old lanes after rain, noticing what has endured. Ancient Chinese philosophy is full of such returns. The seasons return, the rites return, the student returns to study. The ruler returns to self-cultivation, the heart returns to stillness. None of this means that life is static. It means that growth and return are not opposites. A river returns to its course after floods. A tree returns to leaf after winter. A person returns to awareness after distraction. This does not make the journey pointless. It makes the journey real. There is a quiet courage in returning to what is simple. Simplicity is not the same as ease. It may be difficult to keep a clear mind, to speak honestly, to live without excess, to accept limitation without bitterness. But when simplicity is chosen freely, it can feel like setting down a heavy bundle after a long walk. The shoulders soften, the breath deepens, the room becomes larger. The ancient sages often honored that kind of largeness. Not the large room filled with objects, but the wide inner room that comes from less clutter. A mind overfilled with ambition, comparison, and complaint becomes crowded like a market at noon. A mind that has laid aside some of its burdens may hear the creak of a gate, the movement of reeds, the slow pulse of the evening. It may notice the moon rising without needing to name it. A moon in an ancient Chinese poem is rarely just a moon. It is separation and reunion, distance and continuity, the same light seen by friends in different places. It hangs above borderlands, rivers, watchtowers, gardens, exile, family homes and mountain paths. It becomes a shared companion to those who are far from one another. Even when the people underneath it cannot meet, they can imagine that the same moon touches their roofs. That is a very old form of consolation. Perhaps this is one reason moon imagery feels so natural at bedtime. It is a light that does not insist. It does not banish darkness completely. It works with it. It lets outlines remain soft. It gives enough to see by and no more than that. In Taoist thought, one finds this acceptance of partial visibility again and again. The highest good may be compared to water because water benefits all things and does not contend. The finest action may seem like no action because it does not strain against the grain of reality. The strongest presence may be the one least self-advertising. These are not commands to become passive in every sense. They are invitations to listen more carefully to the shape of things. Sometimes the shape of things is revealed in quiet institutions. The old academies, the ritual halls, the ancestral shrines, the village wells, the tea houses, the libraries of later dynasties, all held their own kind of continuity. Generations came and went, but the forms remained, carrying memory across time. A building that survives long enough becomes a witness. Its beams darken, its roof tiles shift, its floor stones wear smooth, yet within it people still light incense, read, bow, speak softly and sit together in shared attention. The same is true of language. Certain phrases survive because they have room in them. They are not too full. They can hold different lives. Know the measure, cultivate the self, return to the root. Such lines can be read by kings or gardeners, students or elders, the restless or the weary. They do not lose their usefulness because they are old. If anything, age gives them more quiet authority. There is a deep comfort in being addressed by something older than oneself. It reminds the solitary mind that it belongs to a long human stream. People before us worried about honor, timing, family, loss, duty, illusion, contentment. They looked at the same moon and asked what it meant to live well. Their answers were not identical, but the asking itself binds them to us. And then there are the myths and legends that drift around the edges of philosophy like lantern glow around a pavilion. The Queen Mother of the West, dwelling on a remote mountain, associated with immortality and the strange realm beyond ordinary reach. The Yellow Emperor, a culture hero linked to origins and order. The Sage King tradition, where rulers were imagined not merely as powerful, but as morally attuned to the pattern of heaven and earth. Such figures may move between history and legend, but they shape the emotional landscape of Chinese civilization. They remind us that wisdom was often imagined as something ancient, distant, and quietly luminous. The world of old China was not only philosophers and courts. It was also villages, fields, ancestral rites, river crossings, forest paths, frontier towers, and merchants traveling beneath broad skies. There were salt roads and silk routes, mountain passes and canal systems, imperial capitals and remote counties. The civilization stretched across immense geography and many centuries, yet its written tradition often returns to the same tender questions. How should one live? How should one rule? How should one grieve? How should one let go? At bedtime, these questions are not urgent puzzles. They are like stones warmed by the day, holding heat a little longer into the evening. You can turn them in the hand without needing to solve them. Their value is in their steadiness. The idea of self-cultivation appears frequently in the Confucian tradition. It suggests that becoming a better person is not chiefly a matter of grand declarations, but of patient alignment. One learns to refine speech, steady emotion, honor responsibilities, and bring the private self into harmony with the public role. This may sound formal, but it can also be deeply compassionate. A person who is less divided inside may cause less harm outside. A person who practices restraint may create room for others to breathe. These are ancient thoughts, yet they are not dusty. They are practical and intimate. They can enter an ordinary evening. Perhaps one has made a small mistake during the day. Perhaps one has spoken too sharply. Perhaps one has forgotten something important. The old teaching does not require dramatic self-condemnation. It simply points toward correction, sincerity, and continuation. Tomorrow is still available. There is still time to return to balance. In that sense, philosophy can resemble cleaning a small room before bed, not a grand renovation, just setting one object back where it belongs, folding a cloth, opening the window a little, letting the air move through. The result is not perfection, it is peace enough, and if the mind is tired enough, even questions can become soft. What is the way? Perhaps it is the road beneath all roads. What is virtue? Perhaps it is harmony made visible in conduct. What is wisdom? Perhaps the ability to see one's own limits without despair. What is freedom? Perhaps not boundless choice, but the ease of moving without self-concern. These answers are not final. They merely rest near the edge of the pillow, ready to be revisited. It is also worth remembering that the Chinese philosophical tradition has always been larger than the most famous names. There were countless commentators, scholars, poets, ritual specialists, and anonymous writers whose quiet labor preserved and interpreted the classics. They copied texts by lamplight. They compared editions. They annotated, debated, collected, and transmitted. Without them, many ideas would have vanished like breath on cold glass. Their work was not glamorous, but it was a form of devotion. The same can be said for the preservation of ruins and relics. A broken bronze vessel, a chipped jade blade, a weathered stone inscription, an inked manuscript fragment, each one is small in itself, yet together they allow a civilization to continue speaking after its cities have changed. Archaeology is a kind of listening. It bends over the earth and asks what remains. Sometimes what remains is surprisingly modest. A cooking pot, a child's toy, a seal, a bean, a footprint in clay. And yet these slight traces can open immense historical distance. They remind us that greatness is always lived through ordinary gestures. Someone held the pot, someone shaped the toy, someone pressed the seal, someone walked through mud and went on with the day. That ordinariness is one of the most peaceful things about history. The famous events are only a narrow band. Most of life has always been preparation, maintenance, waiting, labor, rest. Ancient philosophy at its best honors this. It does not only speak to kings and ministers, it speaks to the hidden hours between tasks. It speaks to the person sitting quietly in the dark, hearing wind move through trees beyond the wall. In a later dynasty, the same old teachings would be read in new settings. Tea would be brewed, scholars would gather in private studios. Landscape painting would turn mountains and streams into meditations on space and distance. A waterfall painted with a few strokes might suggest not only water, but time itself descending. A lone fisherman on a misty river may become a symbol of withdrawal, freedom, or the peace of a mind no longer crowded by ambition. These artistic traditions are not separate from philosophy. They carry it in another form. A painting can embody the Taoist preference for openness. A poem can echo Confucian restraint or the Buddhist awareness of impermanence that later entered Chinese thought alongside older traditions. The civilization became a long conversation between texts, images, rites, and landscapes. It never remained still for long, but it kept revisiting certain depths. Buddhism, when it entered China and was gradually translated into local terms, added another quiet layer to this conversation. Impermanence, compassion, emptiness, the turning of desire, the desire for liberation from suffering, these ideas found new homes in Chinese monasteries and scholarly circles. Monks traveled with sutras. Cave temples were carved into cliffs. Murals were painted in hidden sanctuaries where colors could survive for centuries in dry air. The caves at Dunhuang, for instance, preserve a remarkable crossing of cultures, where trade routes, devotion, and art met in the silence of the desert. That desert silence is another kind of bedtime silence, not the silence of nothing, but the silence of vastness. One can imagine the road to the western regions, the caravan bells, the wind over sand, the painted caves holding figures of bodhisattvas and celestial beings, the still gaze of travelers who paused there before continuing onward. The old world was full of movement, yet it also knew how to preserve still places. The heart, too, needs still places. Not every feeling must be chased. Some can be observed and let pass. The ancients often noticed that clinging creates suffering, whether in thought, desire, or grief. To release is not to deny. It is to allow change its natural course. A cloud does not stay because we stare at it. A season does not wait because we wish it otherwise. The river keeps going, and yet the river does not erase the banks. Form and flow exist together. This balance appears again and again in Chinese thought and art. The solid and the yielding, the visible and the hidden, the name and the nameless, the ritual and the spontaneous. Life is not made better by removing one side entirely. It is made livable by relating them well. That may be why so many ancient sayings feel like polished pebbles. They have been worn by use but not worn out. They fit in the palm. They can be turned over in a sleepless hand. A person may spend many years learning what they mean and still find new nuances at different times of life. Young, they may sound like instruction. Middle-aged, they may sound like caution. Older, they may sound like compassion. There is a quiet democracy in that. The sayings do not belong only to scholars. They belong to anyone who needs them. A farmer at sunrise, a mother at the threshold, a student far from home, a person recovering from disappointment, a traveler on a night train, a listener lying still in the dark. The old words are patient enough for all of them, and perhaps that patience is one of the most profound forms of wisdom. Patience does not rush to prove itself. It allows ripening. It understands that some truths cannot be seized, only inhabited. A seed in the earth does not hurry. An idea in the mind does not always mature quickly. A friendship, a craft, a moral habit, a way of seeing, all of these grow through time. The Chinese character tradition itself carries a sense of that gradual formation. Characters evolved over centuries, from oracle bone script to bronze inscriptions to seal script and clerical forms, each stage preserving traces of earlier shapes. Writing became both stable and changing. The same idea could survive while its form shifted. This long evolution is a kind of history lesson in itself. Continuity is rarely rigid. It bends, adapts, and survives by changing enough to remain alive. Such continuity can be comforting at night. You do not need to hold yourself in exactly the same shape forever. Some loosening is natural, some forgetting is natural, some reforming is natural. Sleep does this too. It releases the strict outline of the waking self and lets consciousness soften at the edges. One may think of an old city gate at evening when carts have passed, merchants have gone home, and the guards are quieter. The gate still stands, but traffic slows. The city breathes differently. Lamps begin to appear in windows. Cooking smoke rises. Somewhere a bell marks the hour. Somewhere else a temple drum answers. The night gathers around the walls like a gentle cloak. And within that gathering one can hear the old wisdom saying again that nothing need be forced. The world is full enough already. Presence does not require strain. Stillness is not emptiness of spirit. It is the permission to rest inside the wider pattern. It may be helpful to think of ancient Chinese philosophy not as a single body of doctrine, but as a landscape of approaches, one hill marked by ritual, another by spontaneity, another by ethical concern, another by quiet observation of nature. Paths connect them, rivers move through them. Sometimes they seem to disagree, yet they also share a deep seriousness about living well in a changing world. The mountains themselves often appear in those texts and poems as more than scenery. They are thresholds, places of retreat, sites of immortals, homes of hermits, symbols of endurance. A mountain is stable in a way the human world rarely is. It watches dynasties pass. It shelters forests, temples, streams, and hidden paths. A person climbing a mountain may feel the mind lighten, not because the world has been solved, but because scale has changed. What seemed immense at the base may look different from above. In that higher air, one sees how small many urgencies truly are. They do not vanish, but they recede. The same can happen in the mind when it is given enough quiet. The pressing concerns of the day remain somewhere below, but they are no longer all that exists. There is sky above them. The old philosophers often pointed toward that broader view without making it abstract. They used trees, water, seasons, households, and ceremonies because these things are already part of life. The wisdom is not elsewhere. It is in how one stands before what is already here. So as the night deepens, there is no need to look far for meaning. A breath enters, a breath leaves, a lamp dims, the room becomes familiar in a new way. The blanket settles, the pillow receives the head. Somewhere beyond the window, a branch moves once in the dark and then is still again. This too belongs to the old teachings. The small is not trivial, the ordinary is not beneath attention, the brief is not lesser than the grand. In some ways it is easier to understand a whole life by watching a single evening. How a person slows, how they stop grasping, how they allow the day to conclude, how they become for a little while as quiet as the architecture around them. And if one were to listen very closely, beyond philosophy, beyond history, beyond the voices of sages and poets, there would still be that same ancient sound of water moving through darkness. It might be a stream in a mountain gorge. It might be rain on roof tiles. It might be the imagined flow of time itself. It continues without argument. It does not hurry. It does not complain. It simply passes through the world, carrying life with it. The old Chinese thinkers knew that nothing in human affairs stays fixed forever. States rise, borderlands shift, families change, names fade, manuscripts decay, and yet the underlying conditions of being human remain strangely recognizable. We seek meaning, we fear loss, we long for harmony. We measure ourselves against others, we forget what matters and remember again. We leave and return, we endure. There is comfort in that recognition. It makes the long human story feel less lonely. The ancients are not remote figures locked behind time. They are fellow travelers on a road that continues into the present, carrying lamps of different colors. Some speak in proverbs, some in anecdotes, some in paradox, some in poetry. Their light is not harsh. It glows softly across distance. So let the glow remain just a little while longer. Let the old saying sit near the bedside like a small stack of familiar books, their pages slightly worn, their edges quiet, their wisdom patient. Let the moon outside continue its slow watch. Let the stones, the trees, the roofs, the rivers, all keep their ancient places for the night. And if sleep is beginning to gather, then there is nothing more to do. No argument with the darkness, no chasing of final thoughts, only this gentle easing, this return to the simple fact of being here and resting. The sages would understand that. The valleys would understand that. The old gardens would understand that. The mountains, the rivers, the ruined cities, the far-off temples, the silent courtyards, all of them would understand that the night is asking for softness, not effort. So remain in that softness. Let thought drift like mist over water. Let the body become heavy in the good way. Let the room grow quiet around you. The world is ancient and still it keeps making room for rest. And now the words can become even lighter. They do not need to carry much farther. They can fade into the same calm that has held them all along. The river goes on, the moon goes on, the old wisdom goes on, and you may go gently with it into sleep. In the oldest layers of Chinese thought, there is often a respect for what cannot be forced. A seed does not hurry the soil. A cloud does not command the wind. A mountain does not ask to be admired before it stands in the distance. These images return again and again because they are simple, and because simplicity is one of the quietest forms of truth. The world of the ancient Zhou courts, the early kingdoms, the river plains, and the walled cities was never perfectly still, of course. There were seasons of expansion and anxiety, of alliances made and broken, of scholars traveling from one state to another carrying ideas in their sleeves as if they were small lanterns. Yet even in those unsettled centuries, people kept looking for patterns that were older than politics. They looked to heaven, to ritual, to lineage, to the measured way a bowl is placed on a table, to the pause before speech. They noticed that a stable life is often built from repeated attentions that seem almost too modest to matter. Confucius, as his teachings were remembered, often returned to this gentle architecture of conduct, not because conduct is cold, but because conduct can become a kind of shelter. Courtesy, in that older sense, was not merely social polish, it was a way of protecting the fragile space between people. To bow slightly, to listen carefully, to hold back impatience, to honor what came before one's own opinion, these were not tiny things. They were the daily weaving of civilization. A kingdom might have walls of packed earth and watchtowers of timber, but the invisible walls around a family, a village, a friendship, were made of patience, restraint, and trust. It is easy to imagine the ancient scholars moving through courtyards in robes the color of river clay or faded moss, carrying scrolls wrapped in cloth against dust and damp. Some would have traveled by cart along rough roads lined with poplar trees. Some would have crossed lakes by boat, watching the water become silver as evening approached. Some may have spent long stretches in quiet libraries, where bamboo slips were tied with string and carefully unfolded like a patient memory. In such places, learning was physical. To read was to handle time. To copy a text by hand was to enter into a lineage of attention. Every character preserved something of the hand that had written it before, and yet not every ancient Chinese philosophy was concerned with order in the same way. Some schools turned toward naturalness, toward the unforced rhythm of existence. Laozi, as later tradition held him, speaks as if standing beside a stream in a valley where mist gathers in the morning and dissolves at noon. The Tao or way is not a law one can pin to a board like a diagram. It is more like the manner in which water finds the lowest place and still nourishes everything it touches. It is the hidden current beneath the visible world. It does not announce itself. It does not wear a crown. It simply is, and by being it teaches. There is something restful about that idea, to imagine that life does not require constant exertion to remain meaningful. To imagine that one can belong to the order of things by not resisting every current. The river does not apologize for bending around stone. The reed does not feel defeated because it leans in the wind. The moon does not hurry to shine brighter than the stars. In the old texts, such images are not decoration. They are instruction offered in the language of the natural world, which may be the only language patient enough to reach a tired mind. Long before later dynasties built their famous capitals, with their broad avenues and palace precincts and layered roofs, people in China were already watching water in ditches, smoke rise from cooking fires, cranes standing in marshes, and frost gathering along the edges of fields. They lived under the same sky as the sages would later invoke. The sky was not merely above them. It was part of the moral imagination. It suggested scale. It reminded human ambition that there is more to the world than human ambition. There is a quiet dignity in the way the ancient Chinese tradition often treats the humble and the near. A teacup, though tea itself became more culturally central in later times, can be thought of here as a vessel of attention. A basin of water beside a threshold can reflect the moon for a moment. A courtyard swept clean before dawn can feel like a small act of order in a disordered age. A child reciting lines from an old poem learns not only the words but the tempo of an older mind. Even a meal shared in silence after work can become a ceremony of returning home. The philosophers knew too that people are not made of one mood only. There are moments of clarity and moments of confusion, days when the world seems sharply outlined and days when it blurs at the edges like ink touched by water. The teachings do not deny this. They often begin from it. If a person is anxious, perhaps they need steadiness. If a person is proud, perhaps they need humility. If a person is restless, perhaps they need to sit with a tree and observe how the tree does nothing and yet grows. If a person is grieving, perhaps they need to understand that sorrow, like weather, changes shape, but does not stay forever in one form. The Analects preserve a world of conversation, memory, and ethical reflection, but what makes them endure is not their distance from us. It is the familiarity of their concerns. How should one act when no one is watching? How should one carry disappointment? How does a person remain honorable when the world seems careless? These are not ancient questions only. They are bedside questions, quietly returning whenever the day has left something unresolved. The old answer is rarely dramatic. It is often something like this: return to what can be done well. Return to what can be tended. Return to the next proper step. In another direction, the Zhuangzi opens like a dream one might remember in fragments upon waking. It speaks of birds with vast wings, of fish hidden in deep waters, of wood that is ignored because it is crooked, of usefulness and uselessness, of the narrowness of human certainty. There is humor there, but it is the mild humor of a person who has seen how serious the world can become and has decided not to let seriousness harden into blindness. A small cicada may believe the summer is all there is. A traveler may believe the road in front of him is the whole shape of life, yet the universe is larger than any one perspective, and sometimes peace begins when one stops insisting upon a single frame. This is a bedtime kind of wisdom, because bedtime also asks for a loosening of perspective. The urgent tasks of the day shrink. The unfinished list of errands becomes less luminous. The mind, if it is willing, begins to step backward from the bright center of effort and enter the wider, dimmer borderland where sleep approaches. Ancient philosophy often performs a similar widening. It suggests that a person is not merely their achievement, nor their worry, nor their title, nor their temporary failure. They are part of a much longer pattern of arising and passing away. Consider the old cities that once stood near the Yellow River, their walls built and rebuilt after flood and war. Some of those places vanished under soil, their names preserved only in records and memory. Others changed shape over centuries, becoming modern cities that still carry traces of the past in street lines, temple courtyards, and local stories. The layers are like pages stacked one over another. In such landscapes, history is not clean, it is sedimented. A farmer may till a field and uncover a shard of painted pottery from a forgotten dynasty. A road may run over the footprint of an old wall. A river may have changed course, leaving behind a dry channel where boats once moved. This slow transformation resembles the philosophical theme of impermanence, though the ancients might have expressed it more poetically than academically. There are also the great collections of classical thought, copied, commented upon, lost, reconstructed, and loved across centuries. The physical texts themselves have had journeys. Bamboo slips brittle with age. Silk manuscripts buried in tombs and protected by dry desert air. Ink on paper rescued from caves. Some writings endured because scholars kept copying them, generation after generation, as if carrying a flame through a storm. Others survive only in fragments, a few lines here, a commentary there, enough to suggest a larger pattern, like seeing the corner of an ancient mosaic and imagining the whole wall that once held it. The mystery of lost texts can feel almost like a gentle allegory for memory itself. We never retain everything. We keep enough to continue. We rebuild meaning from fragments. We hear one line and it leads us to another. We remember a saying from childhood, then realize it was only half remembered, and yet the half-remembered shape still guides us. In this way, wisdom is less like a monument and more like a path through grass, visible because it has been used. The Mohist tradition, with its concern for practical benefit, universal care, and the avoidance of wasteful conflict, offers another quiet current in the broader river of Chinese philosophy. Their world was one in which cities could be threatened, fortifications tested, and resources stretched thin. From such circumstances came a stern compassion, to care broadly rather than narrowly, to reduce unnecessary harm, to value what preserves life and community. Even when the ideas differ sharply from those of other schools, the underlying seriousness is recognizable. People were trying to find ways for societies to endure without becoming cruel. That question remains softly relevant. How do we live together without exhausting one another? How do we protect what is vulnerable? How do we make room for the weak without pretending the strong do not exist? The old texts do not always answer directly, but they linger near these questions like lanterns beside a path. Farther south in later centuries, Chinese thought continued to deepen and branch. Taoist meditation, Buddhist influences arriving along the Silk Roads, Chan traditions emphasizing sudden insight and the ordinary moment, all of these added new textures to the inherited landscape. Monasteries appeared on mountainsides where pine trees bent over misty valleys. Bells rang at dawn. Sutras were chanted in a cadence that could make time feel circular rather than linear. A monk might sit motionless long enough to hear the insects in the grass, the drip of water from a roof eave, the slow settling of the body into stillness. In such settings, silence itself became a teacher. The Silk Roads deserve a moment of their own, because they were not a single road but a vast web of routes, deserts, passes, oasis towns, caravanserais and crossings. Along these paths moved silk, spices, jade, ideas, stories, religious images, and the quiet ambitions of many people whose names are now lost. In dusty towns like Dunhuang, where the cliffs were hollowed into caves for worship and storage, murals still preserve fragments of cosmopolitan wonder. Heavenly musicians float across painted walls, Buddhas sit in calm postures, donors kneel in robes whose colors have softened with time. The caves are like sealed rooms in the imagination of history, and when they are opened, they release not just art but atmosphere. It is soothing to think that ideas traveled that way too, not as sharp proclamations, but as patient arrivals. A teaching from India enters China and becomes translated, commented on, adjusted, absorbed. A local tradition answers with its own language of mountains and waters, of filial piety and cultivated stillness. Over time, the thought world becomes layered like lacquer. Each coat dries over the last, and the surface shines with depth. Ancient Chinese philosophy often treats the human being as a node in a network of relations rather than a solitary unit. One is a son or daughter, a parent, a ruler or subject, a friend, a neighbor, a member of a village, a caretaker of ancestors, a recipient of seasons. Identity is relational. This can feel comforting because it means one is never entirely isolated. It also carries responsibility because one's actions ripple outward into circles larger than the self. To walk gently is to reduce disruption. To speak truthfully is to preserve trust. To govern oneself well is to make the surrounding world a little more habitable. At night, these ideas become almost tangible. The house settles, the sounds of others diminish. A distant train, or perhaps only the wind, moves through the dark. The ceiling holds its shape. The lamp emits a small, human island of light. Within that island, the ancient teachings feel close enough to touch, not as doctrine to be mastered, but as company. The thought that one can become a little more aligned with the world by becoming less forceful within it. The thought that wisdom may sound like restraint when spoken aloud, but feel like relief when lived. There is a poem attributed to Tao Te, the recluse poet of the Eastern Jin, whose work often looks toward humble life with deep contentment. He preferred the apricot blossoms, the wine jar, the simple garden, the quiet return from official obligations. In his lines, the world is not conquered, it is received. The autumn hills, the farm path, the morning clouds, the fading day, these become sufficient. That sufficiency is not emptiness, it is fullness without excess. It is the recognition that the ordinary, when seen clearly, does not need to be improved into something else. One can imagine him walking beneath light rain, sleeves damp, looking over a field where water mirrors the sky, or sitting indoors while the wind moves through bamboo outside. The image is modest, but the atmosphere contains centuries of sensibility. Many later readers found in such poetry a refuge from ambition, a reminder that one may refuse the fever of public life and still live richly in the company of seasons and thought. The same mood appears in other forms across Chinese culture. In landscape painting, where a tiny traveler crosses a vast mountain scene, in calligraphy, where the pressure of brush and paper captures breath and intention, in garden design, where a path turns just enough to delay the view. The path does not reveal everything at once, it invites wandering. A rock is placed not merely as decoration, but as a mountain in miniature, a condensed presence of the old world. A pond may hold koi, lotus, reflected eaves, and drifting leaves. A pavilion offers shade and a place to sit with tea while listening to cicadas in the heat. All of it teaches by arrangement rather than explanation. This is one of the most restful features of Chinese aesthetic thought, the belief that environments can shape the mind gently. A well-tended room, a balanced courtyard, a brushstroke that breathes, a line of verse that ends softly rather than sharply, these can alter the inner weather. Even now, long after dynasties have passed and dynastic names have become study terms in books, the basic instinct remains legible. People still arrange their shelves, open windows at dusk, place a plant near a chair, and feel a little more at ease. The old sensibility has not vanished, it has become part of how domestic calm is understood. If one imagines a night in an ancient Chinese home, perhaps in a scholar's residence or a merchant's courtyard or a modest village dwelling, it might be lit by oil lamp, the flames small and steady. Outside, the garden would be full of shadows. Inside, there would be bowls stacked from the evening meal, a folded robe, a scroll left open beside a brush, and the scent of wood, paper, and tea. A grandmother might be telling a child an old story about a mountain spirit or a fox that learned to speak, while the child's eyelids grow heavy. The adults would know that storytelling can be a bridge between waking and dreaming. It prepares the mind to drift. Many Chinese myths and legends are not loud. They do not always thunder. Some are quiet enough to be told in a low voice at night. A moon goddess dwelling in exile above a silent palace, a wandering immortal crossing a sea of clouds. A river god remembered through a bend in the landscape. A carp leaping the dragon gate, transforming after perseverance, though even that image has a measured grace rather than a triumphant roar. The myths often carry a note of longing. Something was lost or separated or hidden. Something remains just beyond reach, shining faintly. This sense of distance can be deeply peaceful. Not all mysteries must be solved to be meaningful. In fact, some of the oldest mysteries are beloved precisely because they remain open. Who first built the earliest altars on the slopes of sacred mountains? What songs were sung in courts that no longer exist? Which voices once recited the classics to fires that have long gone out? Which hands painted the murals now fading in cave temples? The unknown is not always an absence. Sometimes it is a quiet preservation of wonder. Even the practical wisdom of the thinkers often has this undertone of wonder. Mencius, with his faith in the sprouting nature of moral feeling, suggests that goodness may be as natural as a tender shoot reaching toward sunlight. A person sees a child in danger and feels alarm before calculation. That spontaneous compassion matters. It reveals a deeper human ground from which ethics can grow. The image is gentle, a small green shoot in dark soil, fragile yet alive, requiring nurture rather than forcing. One does not drag a seed upward. One protects the conditions in which it can grow. This is a good thought to bring to the pillow. Maybe the mind, too, has its seedlings, Maybe not every insight needs to be pursued with effort. Some things emerge only when the surrounding conditions become quiet enough. A cool room, a softened jaw, the relinquishing of tasks for the night, the promise that tomorrow, if it comes, will have its own shape. There is no need to bring tomorrow fully into tonight. Ancient Chinese philosophy also pays close attention to decline. This is a sober feature, but not a bleak one. It acknowledges the rise and fall of houses, the thinning of dynasties, the aging of bodies, the way even splendid palaces can become ruins whose tiles are gathered by later farmers. And yet decline is not treated as a moral failure in itself. It is part of the larger motion of things. The flower blooms, the petals fall, the fruit ripens, the branches go bare. The same tree contains all these phases, and none of them is the whole truth of the tree. This can be reassuring to anyone who is tired of wanting permanence where life offers cycles. There are places in China where those cycles feel especially visible. The stone terraces of ancient agricultural lands, cut into hillsides long before modern machinery. The river towns where canals reflect whitewashed walls. The deserts where ruined watchtowers stand like quiet sentences against the horizon. The mountain monasteries where bells still echo in valleys that have heard them for centuries. Great Wall itself, though far from a single continuous relic, suggests the long labor of human defense and the way history leaves lines across the land. But even there, vines grow in cracks, grasses move in the wind, and birds perch on old stones as if to say that time does not end at the edge of a human project. In classical thought, there is often an emphasis on naming. To name things rightly is to see them more clearly, yet there is also a recognition that names are not the thing itself. The Tao that can be spoken is not the constant Tao. This paradox is not meant to frustrate, it points toward humility. Language is useful, but it is not exhaustive. A map can guide, but it is not the territory. A proverb can illuminate, but it is not the whole evening sky. There is always more. The unspoken remains. That may be why Chinese philosophical writing can feel so spacious. It does not always rush toward conclusion. It leaves room for resonance. A single image can carry several layers at once. Water is weakness that overcomes hardness. The valley is low, yet receives all streams. The sage is empty, yet full. The less display, the more depth. These are not rigid claims, they are invitations to perception. They ask the listener to notice how the world already behaves. And as the night deepens, noticing itself can become a kind of lullaby. The sound of your own breathing, the faint shift of fabric, the stillness beyond the walls. Somewhere in memory, perhaps, a line from an old poem rises and then settles again. Perhaps a phrase about the moon over a frontier pass, or a hermit's hut beneath pines, or a river that carries autumn downstream. The details matter less than the feeling they leave behind, which is one of wide, unpressured continuity. There is a tenderness in this continuity. It includes forgetting. It includes partial understanding. It includes the way a person may remember an old lesson only when they need it most, as if a buried seed waits for the right season. The ancient texts were preserved because many people, across many centuries, believed that such small returns of clarity were worth the effort. They copied, commented, memorized, and transmitted because they sensed that wisdom is not owned. It is inherited, shared, renewed. Some of the great commentarial traditions surrounding the classics can feel like a long conversation across time. One scholar clarifies a line, another disputes the interpretation, a third adds historical context, and all the while the original text remains modest, almost serene, as though it were content to be revisited from many angles. This too is a kind of philosophical humility. No single reading exhausts the work. No single dynasty exhausts the tradition. No single life exhausts the human capacity to return to old questions and find new shade beneath them. Perhaps that is why the old Chinese philosophers continue to feel suitable for bedtime. They do not demand urgency. They are not trying to startle the mind awake. They often prefer balance, measure, stillness, and the quiet correction of excess. Even when they are severe, there is usually a humane rhythm beneath the severity. Even when they criticize, they do so with an eye toward restoration. The goal is not to dominate the self, but to harmonize it, not to erase desire, but to place it within a larger order. Not to banish thought, but to let thought rest when rest is needed. Outside, the night may have thickened by now. The trees are less visible than felt. The horizon has softened into one dark layer. Somewhere, perhaps far away, a dog barks once and then is silent. The room holds its own small climate. This is enough. Ancient wisdom often teaches that enough is not a compromise. It is a discovery. If one were to walk in an old Chinese garden at night, the experience would be nearly like walking through a poem. The stones near the path would be cool. The pond would seem black until moonlight touched it. A lattice window would reveal a rectangle of warm interior light. An arched bridge would span water that could not be seen clearly, only suggested by the sound beneath. Every element would be arranged to invite slowed attention. Nothing too bright, nothing too loud. Only the soft dialogue between form and shadow. Such spaces were designed not merely for beauty but for state of mind. They knew that architecture can be a kind of philosophy in wood, stone, and water. And beyond the garden wall in the larger world, there were real and difficult histories. Border conflicts, famines, court intrigues, rebellions, migrations, the long labor of ordinary families trying to live through changing rule. Philosophy did not float above these realities. It arose within them as a response to disorder and as a way of carrying the burden of being alive amid uncertainty. That is part of its endurance. It speaks from within complexity rather than pretending complexity does not exist. At the same time, the texts preserve a belief that life can be shaped from within, however limited the circumstances. A person may not control the state, the weather, the age they were born into, or the fate of empires. But they may still refine their speech, their habits, their attention, their hospitality, their courage. They may choose to be less harsh. They may learn when to act and when to refrain. They may become steadier in the face of change. In this way, virtue is not abstract. It is lived in very small decisions, repeated until they become character. This is one reason the ancient sayings feel so compatible with sleep. Sleep, too, is an act of release into what cannot be controlled. One cannot force it with true success. One can prepare for it, invite it, become available to it, but in the end it arrives like dusk as a natural crossing. The old philosophers might recognize in this surrender a lesson about the day itself. Not everything is solved. Not everything needs to be solved tonight. Some things are held in trust by morning. Some things belong to the wider rhythm of life, which continues even as the body rests. The moon over an ancient roofline, the smell of rain in a courtyard, the sound of a page turned slowly in a lamplit room, the memory of a teacher's voice, the silent movement of clouds over a mountain pass, the flicker of an oil flame in a shrine, the carved face of a guardian figure weathered by centuries, the red dust along an old road, the pale blossoms opening in spring after a hard winter. All of these images belong to the same broad and patient world. It is a world where time leaves marks, but not only damage, it also leaves grace. And so, as the final thoughts loosen and drift, there is no need to gather them tightly. Let them remain scattered like a few stars across a darkening sky. Let the old teachings be what they have always been, a calm presence, a reminder of depth, a small lamp held up against confusion. Let the forgotten kingdoms, the surviving texts, the mountain retreats, the river towns, the enduring poems, and the unnamed lives of those who passed through them all settle into a single quiet continuity. The night is generous in that way. It does not insist on explanation. It allows the mind to set down its weight. It allows the body to return to its natural gravity. It allows ancient thought and present breathing to share the same still room for a little while. So let the room grow dimmer. Let the last edges of thought soften. Let the wisdom of water, the patience of stones, the courtesy of old courtyards, the unhurried way of the valleys, all gather around you without effort. There is nothing to chase now. Nothing to prove, only this calm passing, this human hour returning to silence, this gentle turning from the many stories of the day into the simple, sheltering dark. And when sleep comes, let it come as the old philosophers might have wished for all living things, naturally, quietly, without strain, like mist settling into a valley, like a lamp finally resting, like a river continuing on through the night.